CIS in 2016. South Africa commemorates National Book Week every first week of September. It is an initiative of the South African Book Development Council in collaboration with the Department of Arts and Culture. The recent statistics state that only 14% of South Africans are active book readers. And of that, a mere 5% of parents read to their kids. So this National Book Week is a very important initiative in encouraging the nation to value reading as a fun and pleasurable activity to showcase how reading can easily be incorporated in one's daily life. I think, as you can see by the attendance of today, it shows the reluctance of us not wanting to be participative readers, which is rather disappointing. But I'm sure after today, a lot of mindset will change. With us today, we've got 4 people who are really inspiring to us in taking this initiative. We've got Unoma, we've got Albert, we've got Andile, and we've got Giam. So these 4 people have made time. They form part of that 14%, which are active readers. So they will share with us a summary of what they have been reading and the lessons learned from those books. So I would like to start with Norma, then Albert, as well as Giamo, then I'll put Andile as last.
Basically, the book speaks about the themes. The themes is misogyny, race, identity, love, and self-realization, as well as it delves a bit into also the politics of the time. And it's not very different. I think the political space, I don't know, years go by, but it stays the same. It stays the same. So even within that same space, it's based in the 70s. And everything that was happening then is happening now. I think maybe it's worse now as time has transcended, and greed as well. But I found it to be more of the same. And yeah, I don't know if, I'm not sure, as Zweli said, it's an inaugural book review, so I'm not sure what exactly I should be sharing and what I should not. So I don't know, maybe there'll be a question and answer session, I don't know. There won't be. So yeah, I think, takeouts, okay, if there won't be, the takeouts that I've got from the book is that whatever situation you're in, you can always overcome adversity, and it comes from within. It's not something that we need to look for from an external source. I think, that was the main takeout that I got from the book. Thank you.
Thank you, Norma. It's a bit. It's going to be a bit difficult for me to speak after Norma. She was using difficult words like transcend and things that I didn't understand. So I'm still trying to understand what you're saying. I'm currently reading a book written by 2 gentlemen that I've worked with previously in my previous work. The book is called Broken, The Shameful Legacy of My Gold Mining in South Africa. It's a book that talks about the challenges faced by miners coming particularly mostly from the Eastern Cape and Lesotho. It talks about half of those men who worked in those mines back in the 1970s. I mean, from 1970 going backwards. He suffered from a disease called silicosis, and the mines would just abandon them. When it got to a certain point, they just say, look, go home and die. There's a chapter in the book that's titled Go Home and Die that talks about a man from the rural villages of Lesotho, where he left Lesotho as a 17-year-old fit young boy coming to and living in the gold mines in Johannesburg. And the book talks about the similar situation that occurred to the other people from the Eastern Cape. And it talks about the challenges of the past, the present, and the future. And in the explanation, when I asked them, the book launch, to say, what are these challenges of the past, present, and future? And they were saying that there's a chapter that talks about a generation of mine workers from a specific family. The great-grandfather, the grandfather, their father, and the three guys worked in the mines, and they all contracted this disease called silicosis, and they're all dead. And then the chapter that talks about the pain that is suffered by those who are left behind, like the widows, the children. And then there's a common element in all of this, particularly those coming from the Eastern Cape. They say, we are forced by our economic situation to go into the mines. These guys I was referring to, 3 of them, they didn't complete their schooling. They all ended at standard 8 back then, and they came to the mines. The only thing that they know is to work underground in a mine under difficult conditions. There were no safety measures, but at least things have changed in the past couple of years. And what I learned from the book is that it will take a lot of work for these challenges to be dealt with, because it goes back to the economic situation that people find themselves in. You're the only guy growing up. You've got your mother, you've got your father who's sick. You're the only guy, and they say, look, there's an opportunity somewhere in the gold mines. You pack your bags, you come to the site. First of all, you don't have a place to stay. You come to a place where you've got challenges of language, culture, and then just a range of challenges. There's a part in the book where they talk about the hostels, the way they were separated in the hostels, to say that there was a section only for the Sotos, and even within that section there were people from a certain section of Lesotho. There were people from the Eastern Cape, a certain section of the Eastern Cape, a certain section of the other places where they were coming from. So there was no interaction. But as time went on, with the birth of the National Union of Mine Workers back in the 80s, things started to change, and then there were more safety measures introduced at the gold mines. Though there are still challenges, but they are saying that according to the research that they've done, there's a bit of change there, and the miners are given safety masks. They don't work, it's no longer dusty as it used to be back in the days. And then apart from that, what I like about their writing is quite descriptive. I've read, this is the second book that this gentleman have written that I've read. Lucas Ludaba's writing is quite descriptive. He takes you to the scene. If he were to write about all 9 of us, 10 of us here, he will be so descriptive that you would feel that you are part of the thing. He takes you to the scene. You can visualize what you're reading. There's a part where he was describing the setup of the Eastern Cape, the topography, the fluctuating mountains, and it was in September when they went there sometime last year. So the weather was quite nice. It was green, and it was quite beautiful the way he captured the surroundings. With those few words, ladies and gentlemen, thank you.
Barack Obama, Dreams from My Father. I think it really captures the type of man that Barack is, especially as he ends his tenure as a president. So some of the key themes that he focuses on are family and racism. As you've seen over the past years, the resurgence of racism in America as well. So I think with that, it tackles just a bit of how he's actually experienced it as ultimately a black boy being raised in a white family. His mom is is white, and his grandparents were white, and the dad was from Kenya. So he didn't grow up with the father. He grew up with his mom and his mom's side of the family. So ultimately, he grew up trying to find his black race, but in a white family. So that can't be easy. So it's actually divided into 3 sections. The origins, which describe his early life, where he was born and then went to Hawaii and stayed there, and where his mom moved to Indonesia and got married there, and so another life started there for him. And then it moves on to Chicago. Chicago is where sorry, can I just put this in? Yeah. And then it goes to Chicago. That's where he talks about his life as in law, because he studied law. So he talks about his life in law, serving the community. What was that like for him? And it just gives you a sense of the type of servant he is. Before he became a president, he's always had that community service spirit within him. It goes into the challenges faced because he was working at a lower level than he is now, but it delves nicely into the type of workings that ultimately made him the statesman that he is. And then the final section, which is known as Kenya, is where he goes back to the theme of family again, to find his African roots and find his father, meeting the family of his father, and just tracing back his African roots, clearly demonstrating that family is an important part of his life. I think we've also seen that when you look at, if you just browse through social media and see Barack Obama, you see a family man. So I think the book, the main theme that I enjoyed was the whole aspect of family and how it's actually seen in the way he pans out the book. Just a section that I enjoyed, I think this is the one I saved. It's a little towards the end of the book where he's now talking about just reflecting on his life, and where he was and where he wanted to go, and also reflecting on his studies as a lawyer. So that's something I also enjoy law. So he says here, but it's also quite telling, just to note, of our current status as South Africa, where we find ourselves marred in so many court cases. So this quote, he says, "The study of law can be disappointing at times, a matter of applying narrow rules and arcane procedure to an uncooperative reality, a sort of glorified accounting that serves to regulate the affairs of those who have power, and that all too often seeks to explain to those who do not the ultimate wisdom and justness of their condition. But that's not all the law is. The law is also memory. The law also records a long-running conversation, a nation arguing with its conscience." So with that said, you look at, I think we've had now the privilege of, that Americans have always had for a while now, of being able to watch court cases pan out in the media. So I think this is, when it says the law is a memory, it's a long-running conversation, and it's a country arguing with its conscience. You see, when we talk about the law, or when you see just citizens talking about the law, we already have our own ways of what should happen, who should get what, Oscar should get this. And it's actually just looking back on previous things that have happened. That's why you hear in court cases they'll be referring to in the matter versus whoever, and they say 1990, and you're like, but how is this relevant? So it's about memory. It's going back into the time and forming the way, pathing the way forward. But then he says in the end of this, that after it being a long conversation, let me just find the spot. He says, "I find myself modestly encouraged, believing that so long as the questions are still being asked, what binds us together might somehow ultimately prevail." So I think it's a way of sowing hope, sort of a way. You hope that what you ultimately seek to mold will come to fruition. And that's him as a statesman as well, that he wants to leave that sort of legacy. And seeing that now during the whole election campaigning with the Hillary and the Trump, you've seen that when he leaves his legacy, he wants to see whatever he sowed come to fruition. So I think that was very telling. And this book was written way before he became a president. So I don't know, does it say something about, foretelling into your future? So I enjoyed the book. But also very big on family. So I think it just describes the sort of man that Barack is outside the first black U.S. president. So yeah, those are my takes from it.
What do you make of Barack's legacy, particularly when you mentioned that there's been a resurgence of racist incidents in the U.S.? What do you make of his legacy when it comes to dealing with the challenge of racism in the U.S.?
When you talk about his legacy, there was an excerpt in another book, but I can't remember what, or an article, where they were talking about Barack when he was coming into office, and they said he wasn't seen as a man who could stand his firm ground and challenge these things. But I think his race demanded it of him to stand up and say, I'm a black man. I am going to make these things come forward to the light. And we saw it in a number of cases where I think it was one of the shootings. I think they shot one of these young boys. I can't remember the name. And they went down. I think he had a meeting, he had to go somewhere, but he canceled that and went to that situation. So he aimed to address it. I think he brought it to the fore, but obviously racism is not something we're gonna get rid of all in one day. They're still struggling with it. I mean, this book was written when he was still struggling with it as a man, as a mere man on the street. And even years later, when he's statesman, it's still something that's in the mainstream media. It's everywhere, occurring everywhere. So I think in as far as his legacy, he's tried to address it as much as he could as a statesman. So it's not going to be solved all in one day, but he's made his strides in that area.
I had prepared a review of a book I had read sometime this year, I think, or the year before, but I think I read it again. It's Americana by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. But before that, I guess I'll talk about Die Laughing, where my short story was published. So what happens is every year, Books Live, they release a theme, and then any person who regards themselves as a writer, you can enter the competition. And so I entered the competition last year, I think. And so I was longlisted, and I was excited because I saw Fred Kumalo was also longlisted. And I was like, okay, fine, the long list is fine. I don't even have to be shortlisted. And then the next thing I got an email, and I was shortlisted, and I was like, yeah, okay, that's exciting. And then got an email telling me that, okay, we're publishing your short story. And I was like, okay, we'll see. And then, I mean, it just happened, and I was published just like that. And like, obviously, there was a long process building to the publishing day. You had to edit, and it's tedious. I think writing is nice, but the editing part is just, because I mean, the lady, her name is Joanne, the editor. I think she's strict, I mean, last year, one of her anthologies got, what's the Kane Prize? Nominated for the Kane Prize. And one of the short stories from her anthology won the Kane Prize this year. So, I mean, she's quite, strict in that. So, the short story, keeping up with Mkhulu and Gogo, that was my short story, because it's humor. So, mine was more political. So, it is basically like how we're sitting here right now. So it's basically a family watching Parliament, and there's Gogo and there's Mkhulu, and there is a teenager and there's a toddler as well, 5-year-old. I don't think she's a toddler. She's 5. So they all have opinions about the political space of our country. And so, I don't know. What else do you want to know about it? That's it. So it's basically about them. And I just wanted to write something that was not only adults talking about politics, but old people, young people, and very young people. So, like, what they say is, you know, I mean, the teenager, well, she's obviously not pro-ANC, but the grandfather is, and the child is, I don't know, she's confused, okay? Her name is Yanda, and apparently she's the one that they found to be funny. So yeah, that's Die Laughing. Short story is Keeping Up with Mkhulu and Coco, and you can get it. It's in stores. I think Protea has it, and yeah. Okay, basically, Americana is written by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. She is Nigerian, and now she lives in America. She's a feminist, and yeah, she's well known for being a feminist. But she's a beautiful writer. I mean, she writes these long narratives. I don't know if any one of you have read Ben Okri. Ben Okri. Okay. He writes these long narratives. Like, he'll talk about the globe in a paragraph, maybe. She writes like that as well. And so I find that fascinating. Can get tiresome, but it's fascinating. So Americana basically talks about this young woman who leaves Nigeria for America, and for the first time in her life, she experiences what it means to be black in America, or what it means to be black in a society where there are a lot of races other than black people. And so it's about racism in America, and so in the midst of staying in America, she decides to write this blog where she tackles race throughout. And I mean, like when you read that blog, it's so real. You know, you think about things like Black Lives Matter. It's so real. She talks about hair, and she talks about braids, and she talks about salons, going to a salon, and there are all these African women and from their foreign countries, and they're just there doing hair. And, you know, it talks about the reality of Africa and what it means to be foreign in a foreign country. So Americana is long, and it's written in third person, which makes it easy for Chimamanda to just escape from this one person to our next person. So it's fascinating. What else? Okay, it's a love story. So I guess it's one of those things where when you leave your country and you leave your loved ones. And I guess the protagonist leaves her boyfriend, and for 15 years they're separated, and they meet like 15 years later, and the guy is married, and yeah, and she's this blogger, and she's now a lecturer at Princeton. So it's a nice book. So if you haven't read Chimamanda, I would say read her. I am her fan. I would say read her and just give her a chance, and yeah, that's the review. Thank you.
I haven't finished reading it yet, but it's Futureville, written by Skye Jatani. It talks about it's more of an inspirational book. It's also religious a bit. It talks about dreaming about tomorrow and imagining tomorrow. And it also talks about having a positive mind. Yeah, it talks about encouraging one to have a positive mind, to dream about things, to dream big. The writer also touches ideas that before ideas can come to life, they start in the mind. They start with somebody thinking about it, then eventually going out and trying it out. And the writer encourages one to always think positive and not to be afraid to always try out new things. And yeah, though this is a hijack, I wasn't going to review anything. Yeah, and it's more similar to The Secret, if one read The Secret. It's more similar to that, but then it's a nice book. Yeah, and the person also makes an example of Disney, that before Disney could exist, it was first an idea. It was somebody's dream, actually. Then it came to an idea, then the person tried it out, and before it could become big, it failed along the implementation process, but then it eventually happened. So one should never give up. Yeah. Thanks, Albert.
Do you have questions, guys? Okay. In the absence of questions, thank you so much, guys, once again, for acceding to our call. I know it was an ambush for some of us, but it's a good one because it inspires us to not to look at reading as foreign or for certain people, but something that we need, all of us. So this is the first of many to come, definitely. So in the next one, the setup.
We had one before.
We had one before. 2016. Not in 2016.
It was a long time ago.
Yeah, you see?
2 years ago.
Exactly. So, but we will look into having more regular events like this. At some point, maybe we'll even look at competitions where we have some little prizes for nice reviews. So I think that alone will inspire a lot of people to participate in such exciting events.